But if we go back to Gary Vaynerchuk, that's like he talked about how who cares if someone says a hate comment on your video? Who cares if someone says a left comment on the video? Heart it, respond to it, engage with that person, but don't take it to heart, good or bad. And let the peace from not responding to that, choosing not to react. And then because of that non-reaction, you're going to be able to be more proactive to create content, create videos. And once I started loving it. I learned a skill about looking into the camera, making sure I take a deep breath before I speak, and being able to project my voice more effectively. I wouldn't have ever learned that, at least not very quickly, had I not just gotten started and just rolled with the punches while I came.
Hi, I'm Chris Ippolito, and welcome to Get Coach 360, where I'm documenting my journey from employee to entrepreneur while featuring the coaches that are helping me along the way. Each episode, these coaches provide actionable advice to help me and you, the audience, find more success as entrepreneurs. I invite you to join the journey so we can go and grow together.
Welcome to another episode of Get Coach 360. In this episode, Chris sits down with Dustin Miller, poly-innovator, omni-content creator, and host of the Polymath podcast. Dustin and Chris touch on a variety of topics from content creation to self-education, even pro tips for swimmers. Definitely keep an open mind for this one, as Dustin and Chris both share their passion for knowledge and connecting the dots, as well as how they overcame their fears and limiting beliefs to take the dive and share their discoveries and exploratory journeys with the world. And, as always, we'll close with Dustin sharing his advice for how you can take action now to level up wherever you need it most.
Hey, Dustin.
Hi, how's it going, Chris?
Good. Welcome to the Get Coach podcast. Glad to have you on. You're a fellow podcaster, which made our prep for this episode really easy. And I got the pleasure of being on your podcast, which was one of the first and few that I've done so far. It is something I'm looking to do more of. So first off, I want to say thank you for having me on as a guest. And it's my pleasure to have you on as a guest.
Yes, thank you for coming on my show. Thanks for having me on. Get to have that little exchange, make a new friend.
Yeah, I'm really glad we connected. I believe we connected on what's it called now?
Matchmaker.
That's the one, Matchmaker, which is for any other podcasters out there, great place to connect with other podcasters, to be either a guest or have them on your show. It tends to be a lot of podcasters, though there's just people looking. I'd love to actually, before I ask you what your story is, something I want to create a little bit of a new habit with is, where can people find you real quick? And then we'll recap at the end. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I create kind of an omni-channel presence. So if you search Poly Innovator, you'll end up finding me. But one thing I've tried to make sure I do is on my website, polyinnovator.space, that all my links are on there as best I can.
Awesome. Okay. Now, please share your story. What's your journey been, and how did you ultimately get to Poly Innovator?
Yeah, so I'll try to be as concise as possible, but there's a lot to it there. I started out as a lifeguard and swim instructor, so that got me into the teaching mindset and being of service to people. And then eventually started moving into other fields, not fields, but like roles, such as water aerobics, personal training, water boot camp, even Move Your Joints, which is an arthritis-based class. And so I got to teach a wide variety of people, and I learned that I loved to teach. And then on top of that, I've always been kind of this businessman, this business acumen. When I was 8 or 9, I asked my family for office supplies for my birthday. And that's just kind of how I wanted it. It's what I wanted. And so
what kind of office supplies, I have to ask?
I don't even know. It was probably like a stapler and pens, paper, that kind of random things. I remember I had an office my grandma had an office room. It was like a bedroom. And then she had a giant walk-in closet for that room. And so I just had that as my office growing up, which is kind of fun. And that all led into this teaching mindset, being kind of didactic. And I created a blog called the United Living Construct, which meant to be like a hub of innovation, which is what really led into Poly Innovator. I realized that I wasn't good enough to build that company brand. So I realized a personal brand was where to go next.
Awesome. And for the people that are not familiar, maybe they've heard the word Polymath, which is obviously part of how you've come up with your name. So Polymath and innovation or innovator. But what is a polymath for those that aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, definitely. And I love how you explained that too. A polymath is someone who's interested or mastered many areas. So it's kind of a dual terminology, so to speak. You have this someone who's so interested in many different cookie jars, dipping their hands in a whole bunch of them. And they're not like a jack of all trades. They're more deeper than that. They've gone deep into knowledge, deep into those skill sets.
What do you feel would be a defining characteristic of a polymath outside of obviously having a wide breadth of knowledge and deep, but what do you think would be another characteristic of a polymath?
Understanding interdisciplinary dichotomies. So if you have two skill sets, if you're a dual specialist, for example, you often can find a new innovation or a new pathway, a secret path, if you will, between those two new skill areas or skill areas that you know. As a polymath, you have multiple skill areas to pull from. So the real essence of a polymath is someone who can bridge those areas of knowledge in a unique way.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's a great definition. Definitely different from the one I gave you on your podcast.
That's still good.
Who are some of your bigger influences as far as the lifestyle and the pursuit in which you're on right now?
First and foremost, I've always said my hero is Leonardo da Vinci, who is probably the most true polymath in history that we know of. I mean, of course, there's Elon Musk, who you could consider one. I would even consider Gary Vaynerchuk one as well. And then Benjamin Franklin, Tesla, all these great minds. Most of the time, they were interdisciplinary. They were skilled in many different areas.
Yeah, Gary Vaynerchuk is not somebody I would have originally thought of as a polymath, but I think that makes a lot of sense because that is kind of what his skill set is he's just so in tuned with what people are talking about, but he just understands it in just a completely different way from everybody else. And it has to be because he's got a very wide base of knowledge, but is also very, very deep in it. And I think Elon Musk, if you don't follow what Elon Musk has done, then I think he's the epitome of it. As you said, like Leonardo da Vinci, they were successful in literally everything they did and do. It's crazy.
Well, you'd be surprised. There's Leonardo da Vinci failed at a lot of things, and he didn't fail in the sense that he didn't know enough. He failed because he never completed them. And I think Elon Musk kind of in that same state too. I don't know. I haven't kept up in the past couple of years as much, but I've looked at in the past 5 to 10, and he was close to losing both of his companies, and he's on the razor's edge, as many people know.
Yeah.
But I think because he's a polymath, he was able to make it work. If he wasn't, I don't think it would have worked. With Leo, he actually didn't finish a lot of his commissions.
Yeah. Now I wonder if there's something to that. Do you know what I mean? So Leonardo da Vinci was exploring a lot of different fields, we'll say, right? And he allowed his desire to learn to kind of drive him. But I wonder if maybe what he ended up doing was when he lost that interest and that desire to continue pursuing, he just said, well, I'm done with this, and then kind of moved on. I wonder if that's also a bit of a characteristic with a polymath, because I'll admit I'm definitely guilty of that. What about you?
Yeah, going off the Leo point, there was plenty of cases where he dropped things, and there were some cases where he never let him go. So he was a perfectionist. So the Mona Lisa, there was some scribes looking into the painting and how they were looking at the different layers, and he was still touching it up even late into his life and adding things as he learned new techniques and skills. But for me, I've always done these graphics design called spriting, where you create 2D characters for video games, just a hobby of mine.
Yeah.
And like Pokemon or Mario sprites, for example. And there's plenty of times where I'll just I'm done. I'm not doing this for a while. Or maybe I'll pick it up in a few years and it never left.
Yeah. What are you learning right now? Actually, I'm curious. What are you focusing on right now?
First and foremost, since I started having guests like you on my show, I've been trying to practice active listening. I haven't done as much research recently because I already did a lot in the past because it's a skill that I've needed for a minute. But being able to listen to people without interrupting, because I like to talk, and also just engage with what they're saying, that's something I've been learning and trying to teach myself how to do.
Yeah, and I would say the podcast is a great place to develop that skill set.
Definitely.
To be a good host, you need to be attentive when your guest is speaking, but be able to also be able to engage in conversation, especially like the format that I like to do, because I don't prepare.
Yeah.
I mean, I do, but I don't. Like, I don't have any predefined questions that I want to dive into, for the main reason that I kind of just want the conversation to flow and feel natural. And but at the same time, if I'm not really paying attention, I may not know how to steer the conversation or drive the conversation.
Definitely. And that's something else I've been learning too, is like the dichotomy of that, the balance of that. Should I prepare and keep to a structure, or should I let the person just kind of rant and go on a tangent, let that train of thought go through? I had a few guests where like we weren't able to get as many questions done that I don't know if you remember, but I try to go into a deep area of people. I try to find something that if they've been on many shows, we find something new to talk about.
Right.
I had one guest who's been on like 30, and most of the time they just talk about his products, really awesome products, but literally a lot of the times it's just saying the same thing over and over again. So I wanted to go out of my way to, and for every guest I do this, I go deep into whatever social presence they have and try to find those new ideas that we can talk about.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a great approach. It's a great style. There are quite a few podcasters out there that take that approach. I feel like Tim Ferriss does a fantastic job of that, because I remember listening to a few episodes where his guests have even been like, where did you find that? Like, how did you know? And cause he'll be like, tell me about that time about the white sneakers and like the peanut butter or something like that. They're like, what? How do you know that story?
Right. Well, and like, and that's the thing where I like your format as well, where it's more conversational. You and I get along really well at this point, and so we're able to just bounce off each other pretty easily. And so I try to keep a balance of that. And like Lewis House does the same kind of thing, where he really researches his guests. And he, right before he was about to interview Kobe Bryant, he was told he gets like 20 minutes to interview him, and then you only get like, you gives him a whole sheet of things you can't ask him. And like, he did a lot of his research. Lewis House is a very famous podcaster, great persona, great person, very good energy, and yet he was kind of pushed to the side in a way from this staff. And I'm not trying to say anything bad about the staff, but it's just interesting how many limitations were on him. But he has a concept called the pre-show is the show, where how you prepare for it, maybe not even with questions, but with the connection you have with the person, allows for a much deeper interaction for the actual recording.
Right.
So he went up to Kobe. He had like a few minutes before the actual recording and just got along with him, talked about some handball and some sports that they both like knew well, and was able to make such a rapport with him that Kobe was like, you know what, forget the sheet, ask me what you want, and like we have a funny time, and was able to have a fantastic conversation.
Cool. There's a very similar story involving a journalist, I believe, and Warren Buffett. And normally, again, when you're a billionaire, he would be very protective of his time. And I'm going to butcher the story, but I'll just summarize it. It was similar in that there was a limited amount of time, but this person had worked so hard to be able to get time with Warren Buffett. They're like, well, I'm going to do whatever I can to maximize my interaction. But what she ultimately did was, I want to make sure that he has a great experience. And so what she ended up finding out prior to the interview was that his favorite drink is cherry cola. So when they sat down together, she poured a glass of cherry cola into a cup of ice and said, I know this is your favorite drink, Mr. Buffett. So I'd love for us to start off with you, enjoying your drink and refreshing yourself. And they went from that, which I think they were only supposed to get like 10 minutes or something crazy like that, to having a conversation of like 2 hours.
Jeez. It's like how you started. I know, it's crazy.
What this wasn't even really intentional. That's part of the reason why I like to do the pre-interview calls, where 15 minutes where we kind of chit chat, get to know each other, and see if there's a good connection there. Because I feel like if there's not going to be a good connection within 15 minutes, it's going to be really difficult to record a 60-minute conversation if we go the whole 60 minutes and have engaging and interesting conversation.
Right. Yeah, and I totally agree with you, but I also have this idea that like I don't. I really I don't know if it's because I do a lot of research before I even ask somebody on my show, or if I've been lucky to have great guests like you, where I just haven't really had anybody that was negative. Like I had one guest that was not as engaging as some of the other ones. That's the worst I could say. And like I still love talking to that person too. I had no issues whatsoever. It was a great conversation. We had a great outcome, great story, great what's the word, moral to it all. And it's just like I haven't had any bad experience. But I did have an experience recently where I had a prep call like that on someone else's show, and it just wasn't much driving there. We decided not to pursue forward. So I do
Right.
see the benefit of that, because like I don't know how it's going to be down the line. I may not get as many great guests, and I might want to start filtering out people that we won't jive with. So
Right.
I've definitely.
What have been, so we're both, well, you've been doing your podcast actually a lot longer than me. What are some of the other lessons you've learned from the podcast that you would have not guessed about? I've learned a lot myself personally that I would have never assumed I would have learned by doing a podcast. I'm
Mhm.
curious, what about yourself?
So I started it with the United Living Construct, which was that pre-brand that I did, pre-Poly Innovator brand, I guess you could say. And so the first kind of 18 episodes was the ULC Tech podcast, which essentially just had the same kind of story beats and like stuff we're talking about, but it was all solo. So the first 42 episodes, even into the Poly Innovator stuff, was all solo. So I learned that I like talking. I'm able to get the idea out, especially when I wrote a script. And so the actual idea is actually, if you're doing a solo cast, you don't have to write down every word for word. I like that. But if I'm on camera, it doesn't really work. But if you're just listening to a podcast, you don't have to worry about looking at a sheet of paper the whole time. I did find it was hard to say it without rushing.
Okay, interesting. So you're talking in the case that you had a script,
Mm-hmm.
you felt like you would end up rushing through it?
Yeah, because I talk fast. Like I've always talked fast. People have always given me crap about it. And so I need to take a step back, yawn, breathe, and then be able to calmly, effectually say my words.
Right.
And so that was something I learned. And then I took a class last year called clear communication. And one of the things I struggled with a lot of in that class was being concise. So like emails, I'd send like a 3-paragraph email, even if it's just something simple. And mainly because I was just excited to talk to that person or something like that. And so I think there's a balance of that's who I am, but also I should be more concise to respect people's time.
Right.
So that's kind of a tangent, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, tangents are welcomed. Oh yeah, that's really interesting. I guess maybe what it was is that it exposed areas that you wanted to work on. And so that's then the podcast became a platform for you to be able to work on it.
Well, and one thing I think is really important too is that a lot of people prevent themselves from making a blog, making a podcast, making a YouTube channel because they're afraid of how they're going to be. They're afraid
Yeah.
of how they look on camera. They don't like how their voice sounds because the bone conduction makes it sound deeper in your head versus when you see it on the headphones and camera, it's lighter, it's more high pitched. You're not used to that. And so even right now using these headphones, I'm not used to using headphones when I do recordings. And so I can't hear my voice as much. So it's a little bit off putting, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I've I still, when I listen to a recording of myself, cringe a little bit
Yeah.
because I go like, really? I sound like that?
It's something you just gotta get over. And then eventually it's just not as bad as it used to be. And that was kind of my point where like a lot of people don't create because they're that one barrier. I didn't make videos for months after starting my podcast when I wanted to start them basically around the same time because
Right.
I was so afraid of being on camera.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
It's part of it is really just like fear of judgment, fear of what it's part of our human nature, right? Because
Right.
human nature programmed us to want to have people like us, because if we didn't, we're talking like thousands and thousands of years ago, if they didn't like us, we didn't survive, because
Yeah.
they wouldn't share their food, they wouldn't share their shelter. And we still have that like programming in us. And it is interesting to in a world where that's no longer a concern, that we still have that. It's almost like we have to associate these deep rooted behaviors to just other things so that we're kind of in tune with it.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of societal norms with that. But if we go back to Gary Vaynerchuk, that's like he talked about how who cares if someone says a hate comment on your video? Who cares if someone says a left comment on the video? Heart it, respond to it, engage with that person, but don't take it to heart, good or bad. And like the peace from not responding to that, choosing not to react. And then because of that non-reaction, you're going to be able to be more proactive to create content, create videos. And once I started loving it. I learned a skill about looking into the camera, making sure I take a deep breath before I speak, and being able to project my voice more effectively. I wouldn't have ever learned that, at least not very quickly, had I not just gotten started and just rolled with the punches as they came.
Yeah. I think I would have to say, I'm going to even say it, for everybody, the fastest way you're going to learn is by doing, which is why Gary Vaynerchuk, Russell Brunson, a lot of these types of people that are trying to share that message of just get started. If you want to do something, if you want to start a podcast, a YouTube channel, a blog, whatever it is you want to start, just get started and kind of figure it out as you go.
Definitely.
A lot of people get stuck in this, like, I was very guilty of this in a lot of endeavors or ideas of endeavors where I would research and go like, I need to learn more before I can start. And then you get to a point where you just kind of go like, I don't know if I want to start anymore.
Yeah. See, I've heard people say that, and I think that I've been in fault of that, but I also really love learning. And that's what I built the first phase of Poly Innovator content around self-education. So I've gotten into those research dives. And actually someone who I had on the Polycast yesterday, she's had a problem with like focusing on one thing at a certain time versus also some cases being hyper-focused where she could spend 12 hours on it. And I've been in that case where there was one day I was trying to teach myself calculus for a specific reason, but I was motivated to do it. I spent 14 hours that day. It was like a 1 hour break in the middle to eat, studying calculus when I sucked at math all throughout high school. How does that happen without like really wanting to learn it? And so I think that there's also the balance of sometimes you're going to be productive and create stuff, and some points you need to actually consume, and know when you need to do one of those two things is very important.
Right. What are some of your go-to sources for consumption and for learning? Do you have certain blogs, podcasts, books? Like, what are some of your favorites and recommendations?
Before I say that, I do want to mention that there's two apps I was thinking of for people who want to get started. Anchor.fm is a really great podcast form that people can do, and it's a great way to just pick up your phone and start doing it. It's not the greatest podcast host, but it's very easy to just get started. I transferred off my stuff there too. It was a little difficult, but it's possible. And then there's Vlog Easy on iOS only, but you can do recording that way really easily. So I just wanted to mention that, so if someone wants to create. And then for resources, I have actually cultivated a list. So this kind of leads into the main project I've worked on called the Modular Degree, which is my do-it-yourself degree, so to speak. You create your own self-curated list. You can have someone help you if you want, something like that. But essentially, whenever you are creating this self-education endeavor, you're able to cultivate just a long list of courses, like on Coursera, Udacity, edX, or whatever website you want to do, YouTube, for example, or even podcasts. And so I found myself collecting a whole bunch of resources. And for a website, edX and Spotify and YouTube are three of my main kind of go-tos at the moment.
What I guess, where do you see yourself building Poly Innovator as far as like the skills that you want to continue learning and or the community that you're looking to build?
So I actually started working on building a community pretty early on. I started using BuddyPress for WordPress and started trying to make it a social network of sorts. So the United Living Construct was supposed to be a hub of innovation, a community for innovators and for self-development. In fact, the slogan was World Unity through Self-Development. And that same ideology is what really drove Poly Innovator as well. So I thought about making a Poly Innovator community, as I called it. And I ran into issues with that, and I realized that I'm not going to be able to drive any traffic here unless I start creating content, and I'm focusing all my effort on building this instead of creating. So I started making that pivot and focusing on that. And so right now my main focus is just creating as much as possible so I can drive as much traffic and get a lot of awesome people in this kind of ecosystem. So innovators and polymaths alike, they don't have to be, they could be mutually exclusive, but trying to get as many of those people here. That's where the Polycast comes in as well.
Yeah. So right now the goal is just create content of value to organically have people come in. And then I guess now I'm trying to think, like, what is there a business model that you're wrapping around it? Like what's the plan there?
Yeah. And so as a coach, even as like a swim coach and stuff like that, I've always had a hard time being salesy, even though I know that I'm good. I could teach Michael Phelps something new, so something I'd say when it comes to swimming. And I hope he hears that too, because I'll reach out to him. But I know my skills are good. I know that I can help people, but I've always had a hard time asking for more even if I earned it. So that's something I've had to face with Poly Innovator as well. But for monetization, affiliate marketing, so not selling, but showing awesome products or tools that I like. For example, repurpose.io is something I've really loved. And so one of my newer episodes coming out in about a month or so, I have an affiliate link there, which is the first like monetization that I've tried to do with the Polycast. And so that's the only thing I've really tried to, because I believe in it wholeheartedly. And then I have a Patreon. I want to sell courses. I want to sell books, but I have to create those more off. So yeah, there's a plan, but it's just long distance.
Yeah, no, hey, I'm right there with you. What you mentioned wanting to potentially sell books. What's the top of your list for books that you would want to read? Obviously, you don't need to give us all the goods, but what do you think?
Read or write?
What's that?
You said read or write?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Did I say read?
Yeah.
I meant right.
Yeah. Okay.
So you say you want to sell books and write books, but what's the topic, or like, I guess, what would your first book be about?
So what's interesting about that is that I've actually had a lot of ideas for what I want to write. And one of the things I was wanting to write is the ULC's kind of story, like a more of a fiction kind of based story to kind of expand the ideas, because there was a lot of nuances that I wanted to go into. But the first book I'm planning on writing that I've already started is How to Swim, the Hydrodynamics and Philosophy of Swimming. I should trademark that actually. But cool. Yeah, so that, because swimming is one of my main things that I've taught over the years, so it might be one of the first things I do.
Yeah. So it would be a swimming book, or would it be a book about something else using swimming to teach the lessons?
So it'll be a how to swim book, but as a teacher, I've always focused on the physics and philosophy of swimming. So okay. a lot of instructors focus on, hey, get your arms out of the water and kick. Just go, 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 go. And that's helpful for a certain degree, but unless you know why you're doing it and how to do it better, you're going to keep struggling. You're going to keep panicking. And that's the real big deal, is that a lot of people panic. They focus on breathing too much. And because of that focus on breathing, they end up getting yards behind other people. If you can stay calm, and usually just some simple tricks that I teach, like being able to blow out underwater and stay calm without having any air, will make you last longer than if you had too much air. And so these carbon dioxide is a really key factor. I wanted to go into stuff like that and teach people without having to actually be there.
Well, now I want to learn more about swimming, because So okay, so I would say I was a strong swimmer, but what would be, so somebody like myself, not really formally coached or trained, didn't swim professionally, what do you figure would be probably a bad habit that I have, that if I wanted to become a stronger swimmer, we'll say in the competitive sense, what would be a bad habit I've probably picked up that you would say is pretty common with every amateur type swimmer out there?
Well, and this goes for non-competitive too, but breathing. A lot of times people breathe too much. And like I said, it comes down to that panicky notion. So if you end up thinking, oh, I need to breathe, oftentimes it's not that you need to breathe in, it's that you need to get the carbon dioxide out. Our body actually doesn't need oxygen that bad. Like we can go for a while without it, 3 minutes or so. And honestly too, it's the carbon dioxide starting to make the muscles tense up, the brain start getting kind of panicky. And so once you breathe out of your nose and releasing that air, you often feel a lot better. So that's kind of a basic mistake a lot of people make.
So breathing, is there is there a counting system, or I guess like what would be one, or I don't know if there is, but is there a quick little tip that you could share that would help somebody correct that bad habit?
I have a 3-step system that I figured we might go into here in a little bit. But first and foremost, everybody's different. And so understanding how your body is. There's the sprinter and the marathoner. Some people who are fast twitch, some people who are slower twitch. How quickly your muscles kind of react naturally. I'm a fast twitch. I like sprinting. I like going fast. If I try swimming slow, I sink because I'm dense. And even if I wasn't dense, I'd still sink just because that's how my body really kind of operates. And so understanding how fast you're going and how fast you need to go, and then count how many breaths you take in a length or however far you're going, and try to just keep doing the same amount each time.
Right. So as a sprinter compared to a marathoner, I would assume the sprinter is going to end up taking more breaths because they're moving at a quicker pace, or is that a false belief, we'll say?
Neither. The answer is actually kind of more complicated than that, because I actually prefer not taking breaths when I swim. And
did you say don't taking breaths?
No.
Okay.
I have proper grammar. Don't worry.
No, I knew what you said. I just wanted to make sure that you were saying, like, basically I don't want to breathe while I'm swimming.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, okay. Yeah. I think I understand, but let's go ahead. Continue.
So you're good. No, don't breathe. In fact, when I tell people, when I start with new swimmers, I tell them don't breathe. Don't, especially while swimming. If you need to get air, stand up. Go to a shallow part and stand up. And so swim for 5 feet, stand up. And that's kind of the basic kind of training that I do for some people. And you just go for 5 feet or 10 feet segments until you get better and better at the swimming. And then you can get better at breathing. And for me, I just don't like breathing because it's a little bit more obtuse or tedious. It's more extra effort when I could just swim faster and get there. And there's plenty of times where you have to, but when you breathe, you slow down a little bit, at least in my experience. And so I'm not even thinking in a competitive sense. I just don't like slowing down because then I sink, and then you can't breathe because you're sunk down underwater. So depends on how well you float, depends on how fast you're going, that kind of thing. But I just don't like to breathe. I know, it's crazy, right?
Yeah. I like breathing. It's pretty good. But no, I think I get it, because if the action of breathing is what's going to hold you back, and especially if you're like a competitive person, or it's survival instinct, because like you said, if you slow down, you sink, then yeah, it makes sense that you're like, well, I want to minimize my breathing because it has a negative effect to what I'm doing.
Well, and we're humans too. We have to breathe. And that's the important distinction to make. I mean, I'm human too, right? No, crappy joke there. But essentially, whatever you are swimming, you have to breathe at some point, especially if you're not strong in the lungs. If you don't do cardio or exercise and you jumped into swimming, you're going to have a hard time because it's a full body workout. Yeah. But if you want to get better at it, it's better to practice the actual form of swimming. Swimming is not about breathing. Swimming is about moving. It's the aquatic version of walking, basically, or running. And so if you want to move, breathing hinders your movement in a way because it slows you down. You're focusing on something else. And so this leads me into something I'll share with your audience, it's what I tell all my students. There's 3 steps to swimming, especially when the front crawl motion where you're on your stomach and crawling through the water, but they can be applied to other strokes as well. Number 1, legs. Number 2, face. Number 3, arms. And I'll go into those. Kicking the legs straight consistently, face down, underwater, so that way you're not tensing up the neck, and then arms out of the water, diving back in. When you have that 3-step system, not only does it simplify the movement, but it makes it easy enough to where you are swimming and you are either panicking or not sure what's going on, like why am I slowing down? Why am I not moving as much? You can think in your head, 1, 2, 3. Oh, legs. My legs are kicking straight. My face, it's not down. I should get it down. That's what's going on. So you can self-evaluate more.
See, I think the thing I like about talking to people who truly understand a craft of some sort is how simple you can make it sound. Because I was just like, yeah, 3 steps. That sounds super easy. And then don't breathe. I got it. I can be a competitive swimmer now.
Well, and that's the thing where that head down, like, so I'm going to bring it back to people's old times there with a cassette. Think of like a cassette. Each of those 3 steps has 2 sides. So you have the A side and a B side.
Yeah.
And I say that it's more for advanced kind of users or swimmers, but it's not necessarily that advanced. Like face down is great, but you're still kind of being flat and your head is fighting the water. But for example, if you were to get the chin down farther, you end up creating a kind of droop snoot. Here, where's the camera? Like on a plane where the water goes over your head, allowing you to be more hydrodynamic, more cutting through the water, like aerodynamic, but hydrodynamic. And so it's interesting how you can cut through a lot faster. I learned that from a professional swimmer who's even farther along than I was.
So you're saying if now somebody's at that point of wanting to accelerate their speed, they would want to tuck their head.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That feels like it would be really unnatural for a lot of people.
But think of it this way. Let me see if I can turn this enough. Would you want to look like this in the water with the neck up?
No.
But that's how, when people keep their head out of the water, that's what you're doing. You're protruding your neck in a more uncomfortable state. And it also prevents your arms from moving as much because it tenses up the shoulders. And when your head comes up, you end up sinking down. Even if you're kicking perfectly, you're going to end up pushing your whole body down.
Right.
Because of the spine and whatnot.
It's fascinating. I like this because though we've been talking about swimming for the last however long it's been, a lot of the lessons and the principles that you apply to swimming, you can really translate that to many, many aspects of life, right?
Yes, definitely.
The fundamentals, right? Like focus on this, then this, then this. The don't breathing part, I feel like would be kind of almost like saying, well, breathe in life, right? But it more about like, don't panic.
Yeah. That's
take your time. Don't panic.
It's not about going from point A to point B. It's how you get there. And so it's almost a Taoist philosophy that I employ for the swimming, which ironically, the Taoism is going with the flow, water.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of philosophy, what do you explore that stuff quite a bit? I think you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you talked about education pursuits earlier, so I'll go into a little story there. One of my favorite learning experiences in high school was not actually from anything that I learned in school. It was a self-education endeavor that I did where I think junior year, I went to the library and just burned through the entire philosophy and world religion section in like a matter of months. I skipped some books, obviously, that didn't interest me, but I read most of them in that area. And then on top of that, I had a class that was classical ideas and world religion. And I was able to really get a wide range of philosophy education. I would even say college level because my teacher was really good. And that's really helped me in the long run.
Yeah, my nephew, who's 18, turning 19 fairly soon, just got accepted into a neuroscience program.
Wow.
And so the other day I was talking to him about, just school and what he's planning on taking and some of the arts programs that he has options to take. And I brought up philosophy. I was like, well, have you considered taking a philosophy course? And he's like, no. And his dad heard me. His dad's a little bit of like a man's man kind of thing. So he looked at that and he's like, there's no effing way my son is taking a philosophy course. He's like, I'm not paying for that, blah, blah, blah. And I was just kind of like, all right, I'm not going to get into this argument with you. But I think for me, the value that I took away from once I started exploring philosophy was it just got me to think a little bit and think about things in just a different way. Books in general have helped me out with that, but philosophy in particular got me just to contemplate things that I believe in and challenge them a little bit more, which I've not even read a lot of philosophy course, but I think it would be fun to take a philosophy course or read even more books and just get a little bit more into those types of conversations, more to just challenge the things that I believe in and really, or test the strength of my beliefs on things by having it being challenged by other people.
Definitely. And what you said there about your nephew got me a little heated there because I loathe the kind of small-mindedness that when someone's trying to say like, oh, I don't need philosophy. but it's kind of it's on the same level as saying I don't need science. Science is the how, philosophy is the why. They're asking basically the same question, like why does this happen? But it's more of like how they approach it. Philosophy is more how can I understand it? How do I perceive it? What's going on with that? And then science is more like how is this happening? What's causing this to happen? And you get to the nitty gritty. Whereas philosophy is more of the macro and the kind of head in the clouds. And so a lot of scientists have always been like, no philosophy. A lot of philosophers have been no science, but some of the greatest minds in history, including Leonardo da Vinci especially, was able to bridge both those areas.
Yeah. And I kind of ties it all back to being a polymath, or that pursuit of wanting to broaden your education and then going deep. And I think philosophy is an area that, whether you're really into it or not, you don't even have to necessarily go deep, but I would suggest reading some of the more popular and almost like pop culture type philosophy books, mainly because it'll get you thinking a little bit differently. It'll challenge your beliefs, and just having that exposure I think it refines almost everything else in your toolkit, in a sense.
Definitely.
So that would be kind of my recommendation for everybody. But on that note, I wanted to ask a question here, because I want to see if we can kind of start wrapping things up with, we've talked, it was a very broad conversation.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you. Like, what would be that one piece of advice you'd want to share with the audience to help them level up wherever they need it most?
My key principle in life is balance. And so what we've talked about today, a lot of the time, don't panic. It is the balance of how I need to breathe, but I also want to move. And so you need to find the balance between those 2 points for swimming. And that's what the whole technique I was talking about is about, is staying calm enough to where I can wait until I need to breathe at a certain point later on, delaying instant gratification. And so my principle of balance stems from the idea of, that's what the United Living Construct came from too, the balance of technology and ideology. So I told you earlier how I wanted to be a businessman when I was a child. That grew into the idea of becoming a CEO. And as a teenager, around your nephew's age, actually, I would tell people, I want to be a CEO of an international company driven to innovate technology and ideology. And that was what I said out of like the kid's mouth, so to speak. And I picked up this book off the shelf here, The Tao of Physics, something I've talked about a lot. Just when everyone asks, like, what's a book you recommend? This is always the book I recommend, because it talks about deep philosophical thoughts and deep scientific thoughts. Thoughts. So,
I'm writing it down, by the way. Sorry.
Yeah, no, definitely. Fritjof Capra. I'll send it to you later, something like that. Okay. But essentially, if you want to get into the nitty gritty and the macro, you can combine them together and find that balance. And that's where the polymath idea comes as well. You're having a balance between all these many areas of skill sets. That's what a polymath is. It's not someone who is just unfocused and doing all these different things. I mean, they can be, especially an unproductive polymath, but a real one like Leonardo Da Vinci, or even who I aspire to be, is someone who could be practical as well as mindful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. That's I would say that is different kind of advice compared to a lot of the other guests I've had. But I love it, because it very much speaks to kind of the approach that I have with a lot of things right now. I would say I'm a little bit more of the unfocused polymath sometimes. So still working on that aspect of it. But last question to wrap up, where again can people find you? What's the best place for people to find you, connect with you?
To connect with me, really any social media is fine. Like Twitter is a good place, but if you want to find me, polyinnovator.space is the best way, because I have all my social links there, all of my website links. I'm on so many different platforms. So what I thought about as an omnichannel person is, like, let's say your favorite platform is Instagram and you have no other social media. Well, if you're a company that's not on Instagram, or a personality like myself or you, and you're not on Instagram and that's the other person's platform, then you're not able to connect with that person. So I wanted to take the omnichannel approach, where if there's a platform that you're wanting to be on, you can reach out to me via that platform in some shape or form.
Smart. Gary Vaynerchuk approach for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Dustin, it was a lot of fun. I appreciate the conversation. It's been a pleasure. I know we're definitely going to stay in touch because we've gotten along really well in the 2 conversations that we've had. So thank you very much and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Get Coach 360. If you're looking for more information, you can head over to our website, which is getcoach360.com. You'll find the show notes for this and every other episode there. And if getting actionable advice every week from professional coaches is something you want more of, then make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes.